Hi everyone, my name is Chris if you're just joining, and if you've been subscribed, welcome back. And today I want to do a look back on my favorite products of the last decade. This video is part of a series celebrating 10 years since I uploaded my first video on New Year's Eve 2010. Ooh, it feels so weird to say. And I'm starting with makeup for this series of videos because makeup was really the first realm of beauty that I really got into. I kind of recently have had a bit of a renaissance with it and really fallen back in love with it. So before we dive into the products, I just want to kind of give you a bit of backstory. So I've always been into Halloween. My mom is really into Halloween. And then eventually I really got interested in performing arts and musical theater. So I really realized that I loved makeup, and it was really through stage makeup. And then back in 2009, I really got immersed in YouTube and watching videos and learning as much as I could about technique and application and the world of products. I remember watching a Michelle Phan video for the Lady Gaga Bad Romance music video, like inspired makeup. I think that was really the turning point for me. You know, I kind of understood the power of transformation and just that you could sort of do makeup as a career. Sam and Nick Chapman really changed my life. And Lisa Eldridge. I think Lisa Eldridge was really the sort of the pinnacle for me. And a lot of the products that I use today and a lot of the tools that I have came from her influence. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. So I'm going to be just referencing my list over here. I've broken everything down into categories, and let's start with primer. I'm gonna put this here as sort of a priming type of product, MAC Fix Plus. I think I've been using this longer than any other item on this list. And it's essentially just water with some glycerin, some glycol penetration and slip enhancers, and some plant extracts, green tea, cucumber. That like classic cucumbery melon scent still sticks in my mind, and it's just so nostalgic for me. And they've now put it under the Prep and Prime franchise, whereas I remember it used to just be like MAC Fix Plus. I don't love that they did this like handwriting on it. I think it looked much better when it was just the classic clear bottle, but this was something that I would spray on my face before I did foundation to kind of sheer it out. I would use it to spray my brushes down, to use loose or pressed powder shadows to enhance the pigmentation and give you that sort of foiled effect. I would use it after I did my makeup to take down the look of any powder. Wouldn't necessarily prolong the wear of my makeup the way a setting spray would, but definitely just help lock everything down. I still use this to this day in that same application. I love to dampen my brushes with more so than just plain water, because it does have that little bit of glycerin. It kind of creates this tackiness, so the loose shadow that you're using really sticks to the lid. But it's an iconic product in my book, and I really have been using Fix Plus for 10 years. Oh, I just got goosebumps. Okay, next is the Hourglass Veil Primer, and I recently purchased, this is the travel size of this, and this was one of the first face primers that I really fell in love with, and I still don't think there's anything quite like it in terms of the texture. It's very airy and soft and light, and there's a little bit of zinc and titanium in here, I believe, yes. I wouldn't count on it as your sole source of sunscreen because it's only a 15, but it's just quite, very smoothing and kind of created a really nice even texture, but it didn't feel heavy the way something like Smashbox Photo Finish Primer would, or anything that was a little bit more dimethicone heavy. This was such an interesting kind of precursor because I remember getting a little kind of sample set of this, their 28 primer serum, and it was like a lip gloss, and then just loving them. And then a few years later, when I moved to New York, I actually ended up doing freelance sales work for Hourglass in Sephora's and Bergdorf Goodman, and it was just kind of cool to love a product, then to be able to work for the brand and kind of share that with people. If you do have a deeper skin tone, it can potentially look a little bit ashen, so you want to be careful. You can mix it with their 28 primer serum to kind of give it a little bit more moisture. So that's the Hourglass Veil Primer. And then next we move into foundation, and I have to give it to Chanel Foundations. I've sort of kept this little archive over the years, you know, an old tackle box with a bunch of makeup in it. Y'all remember Matte Lumiere? Oh my gosh, remember Pro Lumiere? This was the jam, so good. I'm still kind of bummed that they don't make this anymore. I had the Leblanc whitening foundation, problematic. But the two that really stuck with me that I used over and over and over again are the Vida Lumiere. So Vida Lumiere and Vida Lumiere Aqua. The Aqua is the first foundation that I ever tried from Chanel, and it's still one of my favorites. It photographs beautifully. It really makes your skin look really smooth and even, but also very skin-like and natural. It's one of those that you shake up. It has like a shaker ball in it. It's like a water-based, very fluid foundation. And then the Vida Lumiere is your moisturizing, very dewy, almost glossy kind of foundation with a light to medium coverage. I just remember how big of a deal it was that I like saved up months and months and months of babysitting money, birthday money, Christmas money to go to the Chanel counter and get my Vida Lumiere Aqua, and my good friend Alicia went with me, and it was just so fun. She was also really into makeup, and then you know, in another kind of weird twist of fate, I ended up working for Chanel 2 years later in 2014 at a counter. That I think is something that I've just been so happy to reflect on, is like a lot of these brands that I really loved and respected and just was a fan of. I had the chance to like work, you know, on the counter or as like a freelance salesperson. I don't know. If you had told me at like 16 that I would end up working at a Chanel counter, I would have never believed you. The other one I want to talk about is Armani Complexion, specifically the Luminessence CC cream, which I think it's now Armani Prima Light Control or something like that, but I loved this so much. I described it as sort of capturing the light versus reflecting light. When you would like kind of turn your face, it would just really kind of accentuate all of the contours of your face and the highlights of your face, and just made you look luminous from every angle without being glittery or shimmery or anything like that. And this was, you know, at the peak of BB CC cream madness, and it was beautiful. And then continuing with Armani, there was Luminous Silk, then it was Maestro, and then it was Maestro Glow. Do y'all remember Maestro Glow? They still make the Luminous Silk, obviously, and Maestro, but I loved Maestro Glow, and I'm still kind of bummed that they don't make it anymore. It was like the Maestro in that it was like the volatile silicones that were very airy feeling, almost evaporated as you applied them. Maestro Glow obviously had more radiance and luminosity to it. The only kind of weird thing is I don't feel like I was ever the same color in any of the Armanis. So I was a 3.5 in the Luminous Silk, I was a 4 in the Maestro Glow, and then I was a 4.5 in the Maestro. And then the last foundation that I want to mention, NARS Sheer Glow, and I remember getting that in 2011, and no SPF, so it photographed beautifully. I always thought the name was kind of weird because it really wasn't sheer. It was quite buildable, and it wasn't really glowy. It was definitely more of like a natural satin finish, but I guess compared to like their sheer matte foundation, it was glowy. And then we move on to concealer. Laura Mercier Secret Camouflage, I still use to this day. I actually had to clean my compact really well before this because it's seen better days. I will say every single compact I've ever had of this has broken. Like the little button to open the lid always kind of gets stuck in there so it doesn't close properly. And that was something I think Laura Mercier pre-Shiseido, every single Laura Mercier product, something went wrong with the packaging. The tinted moisturizer exploded in my carry-on bag. Their honey bath lid cut my hand open one time. I might even still have the scar from it. When I was dealing with a lot of acne, this was great to cover blemishes because it was so concentrated and I didn't need to use very much. I have SC4. I had tried SC3 a few times and I just felt like it was a little bit too light. This larger pan here has more of a peachy tone and then a lighter neutral golden tone. This works for me all year round because I can just sort of mix and match to get my perfect color. I'll use the peachier shade as a corrector on my under eye area and then blend it out with this lighter neutral shade. And because I tend to use more emollient textures around my eye area, it really works with this because this is a drier, waxier product that needs either to be warmed up with like a blow dryer first or the warmth of your fingers, or a really creamy base underneath to help it blend. So that's Laura Mercier Secret Camouflage. The other concealer, if nothing else, just to mention for its significance, is Tarte Shape Tape. I still use this today. I still think it's a really great concealer if you can find your color. And I remember this was funny. This launched, I think, right before I ended up working at Tarte too. So I remember selling a lot of this in Ultas. I don't really need to show you what Shape Tape looks like. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, but if you use just a little bit and you really kind of work it in, it will cover really, really well. And you don't need to set it. It sort of sets on its own. I felt like it really wore quite well on the under eye area. So I could just, you know, kind of throw that on and be done. And actually I have been known to use this all over as like a light foundation. So just like a dot on each cheek and the forehead, kind of buff it in and go. You know, you can do a full face with just shaped. Okay, powder. Clinique blended face powder in 20 Invisible Blend. This was my jam. Maybe what, 2011, 2012, Makeup Forever HD powder was huge, and that's all anyone could talk about, which was just essentially pure silica powder. And it did this thing where it made your skin look like where you had literally no pores, no texture, nothing. And I always thought it looked kind of jarring because I like to be able to see skin texture through the makeup, even if you are covering blemishes and such. I still like to be able to see skin texture, and that's why I really liked this, because it would set the face, it made the skin look really smooth and soft, but it still looked like skin. I have another loose powder that I'm almost done with, and maybe once I'm finished, I'll get this again, just because I have such fond memories of it. And then MAC Studio Fix powder, which I used as like my foundation for a good few years, and I just repurchased this recently when I started filming videos again because I needed a powder with some coverage in it. So if I was sitting down to film and I just needed to kind of polish my face off a bit, which I might even do now, you could really get some coverage out of this, but not really look heavy. And you can see that just gave me a little bit of polish. And I remember when I first got it, they matched me with NC40, which I don't think I've ever been in NC40 in my life. I think what they did is because my forehead is naturally darker than my face, they matched me to my forehead, so the rest of my face was way too dark. And then everything changed when Hourglass launched their ambient powders. I remember getting Mood Light back in the day and just being so blown away by it. I mean, you can immediately see the difference that it makes in your skin. It's not setting powder, it's not highlighter, it's not bronzer. It's like a finishing powder. It just really polishes off your skin. If you're looking at your face and you just feel like you lack dimension, or you can still kind of see some pores, or you just kind of want to blur everything out, the majority of the shades that they make will do that for you. This is Dim Light, but I also loved Diffused, which is sort of like a pale golden color. Yeah, I think if you're about my skin tone, maybe a little bit deeper, and you just kind of want a all over kind of finishing powder, I would say Dim. Diffused is great if you have a little bit of redness, or if you can, if your concealer is a little bit too dark for your under eye area and you kind of want to brighten it up a bit. Maybe I'll put a little bit on now. Let's just take a little bit of the Dim Light. And if I remember my training correctly, they kind of explain that the pigments in here are flat instead of round, so they kind of diffuse the light out across the skin versus reflecting it back. And I don't know if there's any truth to that, but it definitely seems like it could be the case when you kind of look at how they look on the skin. Yeah, I mean, now it's a whole franchise. They came out with highlighters and blushes and all these like limited edition palettes, but I still think, one or two of the classic powders or the palette is just totally the way to go. And then let's move on to highlighter. The first powder highlighter I really fell in love with, and this was, I think, one of those products that people in the YouTube sphere were really kind of all about. So this might bring back some memories for some of y'all, but Dior Amber Diamond. Do y'all remember these? They're Dior Skin Shimmer powders. And this is still one of the most beautiful highlighters I've ever seen. It's a lot more of like a satin kind of finish. I use this all the time and I didn't really make a dent in it at all. You could still see the kind of embossing of like the Dior kind of monogram. Didn't look sparkly, didn't look glittery, didn't have too much color payoff, so it was able to work with a number of skin tones, and it blended both kind of cool golden shades and like slightly peachy warmer shades. So I still kind of weep for this because it was so good, and I haven't been able to find anything since then that quite replicates this. So, and then Becca Shimmering Skin Perfector Liquid. They don't make it anymore. Now they have Ignite Liquefied Light Highlighter. No idea if it's the same thing. It just really looked so natural on the skin. You could really sheer it out and just make it look like it was like a natural luminosity coming out of your skin versus a highlighter that you striped on your face. It was like a really big tube for how much you needed at a time. And then they came out with like a squeezy tube, and then they discontinued it because I guess the sales of their pressed highlighters and their powder highlighters was just cannibalizing the sales of that, would be my guess. And then the other highlighter that I want to mention is the Tom Ford Shade and Illuminate. You can see used mostly the Illuminate side. This was really like peak highlighting for me because it was more or less like a pearly translucent balm. So it was more about a dewy sheen rather than a shimmery sheen. And for me, I have a lot of acne scarring, ice pick scarring on my cheekbones. So if I use any powder highlighter that's too shimmery or not refined enough, it can really just accentuate that texture and make my skin look really patchy and uneven. Whereas this just kind of melted into the skin, and this was like my highlighter of choice for so long. And yeah, I need to probably get a new one. I mean, they still make this. For me, it's a little hard because I wish they just sold the highlighter individually, since I didn't really use the sculpting shade all that much. Nevertheless, still great. Bronzer, NARS Laguna was like the first one that I fell in love with. I had tried Rimmel matte bronzer, and I had like a little sample of Hoola from Benefit. There was this really great Revlon Photo Ready bronzer with like the 4 shades in it, almost like a Guerlain Four Seasons style that I loved, but they don't make that anymore. And then the other was Chanel Soleil Tan de Chanel, which annoyingly, I believe it was this year that they rebranded it under their Les Beige franchise. Changed the packaging, got rid of the gold. And I actually got this jar this year in February when I was traveling for work. One of the Ultas in Virginia randomly had like a Chanel boutique in it. And then not but like a month later, I think they rebranded it as Les Beige, which is so annoying because now it seems like this is a lot older than it actually is. It has like enough orange, which I think really works well with the yellow undertones in my skin. And this is more or less the kind of color I turn when I get a tan. If you do have a tan to deep skin tone, you can still use this just to kind of warm up and kind of brighten your face. Whereas if you are lighter, more pale, you can really sheer it out just to kind of look like a tan versus a bronzer. So you could use it underneath your makeup. I could use it lightly on top of liquid foundation. It would all kind of melt together. It has that like classic Chanel bronzer scent that they kind of took with Les Beige a little bit. It's like is it like a camellia kind of scent? Such a classic. I'll always have this, I think. And once this is either expires or I finish it, I'm gonna get it again in the Les Beige. And then such a fun moment, the Tom Ford bronzing powder. This was like a limited edition version from their Soleil collection, I think in like 2015. This huge compact. This is O2 Terra. I don't think they make a matte version of this anymore. I think the only one they make is a really shimmery version, and I've heard that it's not really very good, which is annoying because this was so good. It had a bit of coolness to it, so you could use it to kind of sculpt, and there was enough pink where it would kind of give you a bit of warmth. And because it was so big, you know, I really didn't make a dent in it at all. If nothing else, I just hang on to it for this big mirror. And then last but not least is the MAC, oh, this is so old, MAC Pro Sculpting Cream in Coffee Walnut. This is still my very favorite contour product ever because it's so gray. There's almost like an olive undertone to it. So it really mimics the effect of natural shadowing on the face. I'm not sure if you can still get this in MAC Pro, and they don't make it in their regular line. They do make the powder sculpting products, but this was, to me, like the best that they ever did and the best contour that I've ever used. So it's kind of a bummer that they don't make it anymore. And then blush, MAC Desert Rose. I remember hearing about this from an ex-Sparkage video. I think she was like, had worked at a MAC counter and, you know, said it worked on a bunch of different clients. So that really was intriguing to me. And I've repurchased this multiple times in the last 10 years and I still use this. I have it on my face now. It is one of those that you kind of have to scrub at, but I like it because it has a touch of blue. And so it kind of does brighten your face, and I think it works with a lot of different skin tones, but then it has that really soft, kind of muted rosy quality as well that just really looks, at least on my skin tone, like a very natural flush. I was someone that wanted to love NARS Orgasm, but just could not wear it because I always felt like the shimmer was like green, like it was like a golden green, and it just looked really unnatural on my skin. And because it had the shimmer, it really accentuated all the scars on my face. So this was really my tried and true, and 10 years of MAC Desert Rose. Who would have thought? Next we move on to eyes, and eyeshadow primer is one of those things that just like changed my life. And I'm sure some of y'all can relate. You know, it's really a night and day difference. And I remember I tried like the Urban Decay. That one didn't really work for me at all. Too Faced Shadow Insurance I used for a little while and enjoyed, but it wasn't until I tried the NARS Pro Prime, or what do they call it now? Smudge Proof Eyeshadow Base. This was and still is my favorite. I mean, this is what I use anytime I put eyeshadow on. I still think it's the best. And the reason I like like it so much is because, first of all, I think it actually has more of a tacky finish than some of the others. I always felt like the Too Faced was a little bit thin, and same with the Urban Decay, they were just a little too watery, whereas this is slightly creamy, and it does have a little bit of like a brightening tint. I don't know if it's like white pigment or what, but it just really felt like it amplified the color of my eyeshadows as well as helping them last and apply very evenly. And even though I have drier skin, my eyelids are still the part of my face that is so oily for some odd reason. They have since come out with like tinted versions of this, but I think if you can wear this, the original shade, I mean, this is, I think, the best one. I sort of started getting into makeup in the days where MAC was it. MAC was really the benchmark. It was the reference point. It was like, okay, well, what shade foundation am I in this brand if I'm an NC20 in MAC? Which I think is so interesting because it was obviously a high-end brand, but compared to, you know, a Lancome or a Dior or even a Bobbi Brown, the prices were a lot more accessible. And I think that just says so much about that time, right? Like 2010, post-recession, people wanted like a kind of nice high-end makeup and they didn't want to spend a lot of money on it. But if you want to talk about like changing the industry, the Urban Decay Naked palette was a pivotal moment. I mean, the only other product I can think of that has caused so much hysteria in the makeup industry since this has been, I would say, like the Becca Champagne Pop highlighter and like maybe the Anastasia Modern Renaissance palette, in terms of like everyone and their mother needed to have this. I mean, people were like, would line up anytime I would go to Sephora to see it. They would always be out of stock. I remember I got lucky once when I went to Sephora inside JCPenney. I think the reason this was so popular is kind of gave you shades that everyone was talking about, you know, like your taupes, your bronzes, your matte kind of tan camel colors, kind of gunmetals. It was all in one. And I think this was at a time when palettes were not super common. I mean, you could assemble your own MAC palette and buy individual pans at what, $10, $11 a piece, or you could spend, you know, $48, $50 maybe, and this had like all the shades you would need already kind of pre-made for you. I remember there was like a big conversation around the fact that each eyeshadow pan itself was more or less equivalent to what you would get in a MAC eyeshadow. You know, 1.3 grams per pan, and then a MAC eyeshadow is 1.5. So to fill up a MAC palette would cost you, you know, easily $100, whereas this was half the price and it was pre-assembled for you, and it was all the colors you would probably end up buying anyway. And then they gave you a liner with it. They gave you a little mini primer. You know, it was really appealing. This just became the new standard. You know, it was like tutorials that people were creating with this, the favorites videos that this was featured in. I mean, this was it. I think we're slowly seeing a shift towards people pushing for individuals and kind of quads that allow you to, you know, get more use out of your shadows versus having, you know, a palette like this where there's only one or two shades that you use every day. Really weird to me that they would reformulate it, but I guess just to keep up with the trends. You know, there's really no warm shades in here after Modern Renaissance really kind of came out. I think warm toned eyeshadows just more or less became the new neutrals, you know? The other really significant palettes for me were these Wet n Wild Color Icon palettes. They had like the trios, they had the quad, or was it 6? And then these, which were, and still are, amazing eyeshadows. I mean, you can still, I mean, that still holds up. This I Love Matte palette I loved. And then the blue had me at hello I loved. I really had a moment with blue eyeshadow. I mean, I hit pan on this shimmery white here too. So, I mean, y'all remember the Color Icon shadows. Like, people couldn't believe that they were only $5, $6, $7. NARS eyeshadows was also a really pivotal moment for me. Specifically the Alhambra duo, got soft champagne and kind of like a pinky gold. Absolutely beautiful. They still make these, I think, in their like new eyeshadow packaging, but I just would recommend this to so many people. It's just like, you know, just throw it all over your lid with some mascara just to kind of brighten your eyes up and call it a day. And then Outremer, just this amazing matte royal blue. And I remember my friend Julia, Miss JBM22, who we met through YouTube in like 2011, 2012. I kept calling it Outremer, being the American that I am, and she's Canadian, so she corrected me with the French. One of my favorite looks to do was to just take this all around my eyes and just do like a very solid block of royal blue. NARS was definitely coming out with some of the most unique colors you could get at a place like Sephora. So then we move on to mascara. Maybelline mascara, specifically Full and Soft and Lash Discovery. That's what I have on my eyes right now. Full and Soft up top, Lash Discovery underneath. I always went for the waterproof versions because my lashes are so straight. It's almost come full circle. You know, I think there's a big crowd of people these days who really want their lashes to just look very kind of naturally defined and, like the name suggests, full and soft. Take the Glossier mascara, for example. Could sit in the same category as something like this, which is just very naturally defining and naturally perfecting. And then I loved the Lash Discovery because the brush was so tiny, and me already having small eyes, this was like a godsend because I could actually do my mascara without poking my eye out. I still just feel like I love them like I used to back in the day and would still recommend them. All right, let's do brows. Anastasia Brow Wiz. I still haven't tried anything quite like it. It's one of those, well, I don't really need to tell you what Brow Wiz looks like, right? I mean, yeah, the reason I like this is because it's on the stiffer side. It doesn't really transfer too much pigment to your skin. So if you accidentally go in with too heavy of a hand, you don't have this like solid stripe of color on your brow. It's really easy to like feather it in. The colors that they make are really good. Especially for me, having dark brows that have a natural kind of bluish, greenish coolness. Over the years, I've tried, you know, Maybelline Define a Brow, and there was a Flower Beauty one, and I tried the Morphe one, and I tried the NYX one, and this is still my favorite because, like I said, it doesn't deposit a ton of color, so it's a lot more workable. You can really kind of create structure versus just like shading your brows, you know? And then Suki Brow Pen. This is something I started using in the past few years. Always wanted to try it because of Lisa Eldridge, but it was always so hard to get a hold of. I think they now sell it in Cult Beauty. This is the 01, and I have this on my brows right now as well. And it's almost like a greenish kind of khaki color. And for the same reason I like the Brow Wiz, it doesn't really deposit too much color. So I think it's a little bit more user-friendly. You might not think, you know, looking at that it would work on my brows, but it really does. It's so soft and cool toned. Just looks like hair. I started using Glossier Brow Flick since it launched, and I like that one, but it's almost like a liquid liner for your brows. It's really pigmented, so you have to be really, really, really careful, versus this, if I mess up, if I, you know, apply too much pressure, it doesn't look like I just took liquid liner on my eyebrows. And then NARS Brow Gel, the Oural. It was a clear brow gel. They don't make it anymore, but I loved that one because the brush was a little bit smaller, so it was a little bit easier to maneuver, and it wasn't crunchy. I always felt like the Anastasia one was like, basically felt like hairspray, like it was so stiff and crunchy and felt really weird. I also really love the e.l.f. Lash and Brow Clear Mascara as a brow gel, but the NARS one was just even better because it gave my brows a little bit more hold, a little bit more texture, and it lasted a little bit longer. So. And then we get into lips. NYX lip pencils. I was a fan then, and I'm a fan now. I still think this is one of the best lip liners you can get. This is the shade Natural. It was one of those things that was always kind of talked about in the industry, that German pencils tend to be the best. German pencils, Italian powders, Japanese mascara. You know, the best of the best. I mean, I just love that NYX makes so many different colors. They're affordable. You know, Ulta's always having a buy one, get one half off. You need a lip pencil, definitely go to NYX. NARS Dolce Vita, though, was probably my most used lipstick throughout the last 10 years. I think for a good 3 or 4 years straight, that was what I was wearing all the time. Gave my lips a little bit of warmth, a little bit of sheen, a little moisture, but it wasn't a really pigmented shade, so I could, you know, wear it to school and not really get in trouble. And then these Makeup Forever Rouge Artist Intense lipsticks were amazing. They had 50 shades and they made a ton of unique colors. I had number 40 and number 49. Sorry, the sun is now coming in through the window, so I feel like I might be getting a little bit washed out. I was wearing number 40 all the time. It's like a matte traffic cone orange. The 49, which is like a really deep blackberry color. I mean, it was just so unique to find these kinds of shades, and the texture was so densely pigmented. They wore really well, but they took a little bit more time to apply because they were so like kind of waxy and solid. I would still rock this to this day. Okay, sorry, I had to swap out my battery. I've been filming for almost 2 hours at this point. And then the last lip product is Sleek Pout Paint in Pika Blue. It was sort of like their version of the OCC lip tars. I don't know if anyone else remembers Obsessive Compulsive Cosmetics. And I actually still have my lip tars. Oh, I still have my Sleek too. Oh my God. Thought I got rid of it, but I still have it. My Sleek Pout Paint. I just remember wanting a blue lipstick so bad, and it was so impossible to find. And I just remember wearing it all the time. It was like it was either blue or bright orange. I mean, not much has changed, I guess, in terms of the colors I like. That's so funny. Didn't actually use lip tars until years later, and unfortunately OCC no longer exists. It's one of those really unfortunate situations where when they went to Sephora just kind of, for lack of a better word, screwed them over. I'll have to find the article about kind of what happened and link it below, but it's really sad because this was such a really fantastic artistic brand that really kind of revolutionized the industry for a time there. In terms of the colors and the textures that they were doing was just so different. And then nails, just like, you know, the blue lipstick, I think the decade can be defined by blue nail polish. The joy that having painted blue nails gave me. One of my favorites was the Sally Hansen Insta-Dry in Brisk Blue. This Essie Makes Some Noise, this OCC RX, cerulean called Videodrome, which, great reference. So then let's talk about brushes. My favorite brush is this BYS foundation brush, and this is an Australian brand, and I got this while I was on a student ambassador trip in 2010. I still have not been able to find a better foundation brush since. It's a densely packed brush, but there's still a lot of flexibility to it, and it's quite a bit larger than, you know, like a standard, like a MAC 190 brush. So it's a lot larger and a lot fuller. I could really just like kind of apply it and blend at the same time. I would always use the side or the tip here to kind of stamp concealer on my under eye area. And then my good friend Josh Collier, his husband is from Tasmania, so they actually moved there. But one time when he was visiting, he brought me back a few more of the BYS foundation brushes, and they're not the same as the one that I got in 2010. And you might be able to see here, this is my original with my painted handle. Remember when everyone was doing that? You can see that the bristles are a little bit longer on the original and slightly fuller and slightly longer. I mean, I still use these and I still like them, but they don't quite do what this one does. I have had to glue the ferrule back onto the handle, but that's it. I mean, I really don't get much shedding from it. It's still going strong. It's almost like muscle memory. Like I know exactly how to work with this brush. It's really kind of adapted to the way I like to use it, and I love it. So if you live in Australia and they still, I'm not sure if they still make this, but if they do, definitely at least worth it to check them out. And then, okay, I cannot make a video about makeup brushes without talking about the e.l.f. blush brush. I have had these e.l.f. blush brushes for 10 years at this point. But yeah, I mean, this is like a brush that I just had multiples of because I love this brush so freaking much. I actually picked up a new one just to see how they compare, and this is what one looks like that you can buy now, and this is what the old one looked like. But you can see the new one, the bristles are a little bit longer. It's not as dense. The bristles kind of fan out a little bit more on the end. I mean, technically this is probably better for blush application than the original. I could do an entire face with just this brush, and I have done it so many times. This is a good example. They were like slightly pointed on the end here, so you could kind of turn it on its side and use it to sculpt. You could use it to slightly highlight here. You could use the flat side here just to kind of smooth the blush on your face. It was small enough to use with powder, where I just wanted to kind of set precise areas. And you could use it just kind of the way you would use a foundation brush like this. I'm very passionate about my 10-year-old $3 e.l.f. blush brushes that have held up beautifully. Some of them I have had to like glue the handle back, but like very little shedding, if at all. And I still think if you don't want to spend a lot of money on your brushes, but you want something that is made well, I mean, let this be proof. I still reach for them every single day. So the other brush that I've had for a long time is this e.l.f. Professional Foundation brush. Do y'all remember these? This one is really, really thin. It's even thinner than a MAC 190. What I love this for is applying cream and liquid highlighter. Like I use this with my Westman Atelier highlighter. This is what I was using with my Tom Ford Shade and Illuminate highlighter. Go figure that I use, you know, a $50 highlighter with a $1 brush that's almost 10 years old. But the reason I really like this is because it just gave such a light application of highlighter, and I think for me that's what helped it look more natural. That's what minimized the amount of texture that the highlighter accentuated. Just like the blush brush, I picked up a new one of their $1, I think they're maybe $3 at this point, but their new foundation brush. And this is how they compare. The handle's a little bit shorter, it's slightly denser, slightly more narrow, and shorter bristles. I've actually really loved using this for cream and liquid blush because it's on the smaller side, so I can be more precise with it and would not end up with these like blocks of color on my cheeks. I might even actually need to get a few more of these because I like this size. It's kind of like an oversized concealer brush or a mini foundation brush, depending on how you look at it. The Real Techniques setting brush, absolutely phenomenal. I really love small, precise powder brushes. I like to just put the powder where I want it, just to kind of set areas where I don't want the shine, but I usually like to have some natural luminosity kind of peeking through. Real Techniques was one of those other brands that really changed the makeup landscape. I mean, Pixie Woo was so influential in the YouTube community, and to then see that they came out with these really high quality professional brushes, not just in how well they were made, but in the shapes that they were coming out with. They were made with a professional in mind, or someone who had at least an artistic perspective when they were applying product. The other powder brush I love is the Sue Devitt powder brush. Again, another one of those Lisa Eldridge recommendations. For the same reason I love the Real Techniques, it's quite small and precise. You can kind of press the powder into the skin, but because the bristles are quite loose and fluffy at the end, if you have any excess powder, you can just kind of flick it off, and this just kind of bounces back into shape. I have, I think, 2 of them, and I take such good care of them because you can't get these anymore, and they are really well made, but I just really am so careful with them. The Hourglass number 2 brush, I love. This was such a godsend to use while I was doing freelance work because you can do an entire face with just this brush. And I have to say, Hourglass brushes are made so well. Like, if you want to invest in a nice luxury brush and you want synthetic bristles, their whole collection is synthetic. This is through and through my recommendation. Number 1 is the way that the handles are weighted. They put the majority of the weight here on the end, so when they're stored vertically, they don't kind of like flop over, but when they're resting in your hand, essentially the middle of your hand almost acts like the fulcrum point, right? So you have some weight on this end, the weight on this end, so it just becomes like an extension of your hand. Triple glue the bristles throughout the ferrule so they're really kind of put into place, and then the shape, so it's slightly pinched here on the side, so you do get a kind of a bit of a flat edge where if you wanted to kind of apply your blush that way, and it's almost like an oval when you look at it this way. So, you know, you can go in and kind of sculpt, you can do some bronzer with it, but it also makes an incredible foundation brush. And I also personally love that the handle is on the longer side. Like, I have big hands, so for a brush to be able to sit comfortably in my hand, the handle needs to be on the longer side. You know, there is a time and a place for a short handle, like something like the Kier Weiss, when you're treating it as like an extension of your finger. But if we're talking about blending and buffing, I do prefer a longer handle. I have multiples of them from when I worked for Hourglass, but at this point they're 6 years old and they just still feel pretty much brand new. I mean, they haven't really lost their shape. They're really easy to clean. And then the other Hourglass brush that I want to mention is this number 8. I think these are my 2 very favorites, my most used. This is like an oversized concealer brush. Compared to their number 5, it's like at least twice the size. This is still like my preferred under eye concealer brush because I can turn it on the side, apply my corrector where I want to, and then use the flat edge to kind of blend it in. I tend to get sort of patchy and bumpy on my cheeks. Just to be able to quickly kind of cover that up without spending too much time on it is ideal. And then we get into eye brushes. So has to be said, Sonia Kashuk's small eyeshadow brush. I was a big Queen of Blending fan, and I think that was like one of her favorite brushes. Almost anytime I apply eyeshadow, this is what I'm using. And just like the e.l.f. Studio blush brushes, I could do pretty much an entire eye with this. So you can use the flat side to kind of pack color on. You can use the tip here, which has got like a slightly rounded edge, to kind of sculpt out a crease. You can use it to blend out and kind of smoke out the lower lash line. And then if you applied a color in the crease, you could then rotate the brush on its side and then kind of buff out the edge with it. So I believe they still make something called a small eyeshadow brush. I'm not sure how different it is from this, but a MAC 217 was and still is like the creme de la creme of blending brushes. I believe MAC has updated all of their brushes to be synthetic now, and people don't like the 217s anymore from what I've heard. So if you can find a vintage one that has like, I think it's goat hair, I want to say, kind of like tapered here towards the end. So if you were to kind of blend out a crease line with it, it was still precise enough, but because the bristles were nice and soft and kind of fluffy, you definitely got the blending that you needed. I think now Zoeva or Sigma might be the way to go. I believe they're still using natural bristles, and for me personally, with powder shadows, I much prefer a natural bristle. It doesn't remove as much pigment as a synthetic brush can sometimes when you go to blend it out. So 2 more brushes. Bobbi Brown lip brush. I like it because it has more of a squared edge to it. I don't really like these style where they're really thin and they are kind of long and they kind of come to more of a point. I feel like you get too much of a harsh line and it's harder to really work the lipstick into the lips, versus this Bobbi Brown one is a little bit fluffier, gives you more of a soft edge, and I think it's a little bit easier to manipulate color because you can really work it into the lips. And then last but not least, this amazing Chanel eye contour brush, number 14. Just a very, very small, kind of squared off brush. This I absolutely love for like inner quarter highlighting, for kind of blending out a liner without making it too smoky, or like the name suggests, like doing a bit of sculpting work. So if you wanted to kind of carve out a crease, you could do that. I could use it for like a soft kind of brow. And yeah, I think that brings me to the end of this very long look back on my favorite makeup of the last 10 years. Whew. I'm ready for a nap. I'm also going to be doing videos for my favorite skincare and fragrance and hair care of the last 10 years, so keep an eye out for those. Be sure to subscribe if you aren't, and if you are subscribed, definitely click the bell to be notified when I upload a video. I would love to know like what some of your all-time favorite products are, so please feel free to leave those in the comments below. And until my next video, I will talk to you very soon. Bye.